G'day mates and Sheilas, or your true blue fair dinkum Aussies, how are ya? Flat out like a lizard drinking? Aussie, Aussie, Aussie and all that? Does Australia Day and the Anzac spirit give you the warm and fuzzies? This past Anzac Day, Australia commemorated 100 years since the invasion of Gallipoli, but the 25th of April 2015 marked another particularly significant milestone for my family. On this day, 200 years ago, in 1815, my ancestor first arrived in Sydney. He was aboard a ship called the Indefatigable, transported for 7 years for stealing 2 stamps and a watch chain. His name was Charles Blinman, and he had a son called Charles, who then had a son called Charles, who went on to have a son called Charles, who had a son called Percival, who had a son who changed his name to Ibrahim, who along with my mother Maimuna had 4 children, a girl, and then 3 boys, all called Abdul. The oldest Abdul, he got the brains. The middle one, he got the heart. And I got the courage. So that must make my sister Dorothy, because she got all 3. My family history in this country goes back 200 years to within 30 years of white settlement. But my skin is brown. My name is Abdul Hamid bin Ibrahim bin Abdullah. And I'm a Muslim. And I know this is unsettling and confusing for some people. As far as post-European settlement immigration goes, my roots run pretty deep. It says Australian on my passport. I was born here. It's the only home I've ever known, and I like it so much, I honestly wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But I'm no Aussie. I've never really been allowed to feel like an Aussie. I'm no flag-waving cricket fan. No tinny-smashing thong and singlet-wearing larrikin. There's nothing home and away about me. A current affairs doesn't talk about my current affairs. So how does a person like me reconcile these differences? Well, the short answer is, I don't. And I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to apologise, justify or explain who and what I am. But, and here's the big but, I always inevitably do. You see, I'm an artist. And as an artist, my practice engages with ideas of difference. It's an exercise in semiotics where I play with potentially contradictory signifiers to critique and challenge entrenched societal norms. Societal norms I'm often at odds with. I use these signs to push and pull my audience in different directions, and in that flux, hope to create an environment that encourages critical thinking. This first work is called Them and Us. It features my brother in the background and myself in the foreground. The tattoo on my ribs I got specifically for this work. I took a sign which has been recently almost exclusively claimed by Australian nationalists, the Southern Cross, and I amalgamated it with a crescent moon and star, a traditional signifier of Islam. I find the work successful if it is challenging, but also rewarding, and thus by its nature, generous. I'm not interested in being didactic or obvious, and I by no means want to claim any type of objectivity. I'm revealing my biases with the hope of engaging and examining yours. Some of my critics have claimed that, they have said that maybe my message is too convoluted, but I would argue in response that what they're looking for is probably propaganda, as opposed to any exploration with ideas. Now, we all know where we come from and how our experiences inform who we are and who we are to become. I'm trying to work out my platform and how best to affect positive change. Now, this might be my halal certified Sharia agenda getting the best of me, but in the neighbourhoods that I grew up in, being a Muslim, generally speaking, meant you were brown or black, you were poor, and your parents were a bit strange. Aside from this and what I'd call classic racism traditionally directed at black and brown people in this country, it seemed to me being a Muslim was not much more than an eccentricity. Then, when I was 14 years old, some Saudis flew some planes into some buildings, a whole heap of people died, and in the popular imagination, we became an existential threat. The world changed. Now, it changed for everybody, but it really changed for us. You couldn't open a newspaper, turn on the television, or listen to the radio without being reminded that you were the bad guy and that you were, frankly, unwelcome. The war on terror felt like a war on you. Morning television hosts and so-called journalists alike bullied their Muslim guests. Are you a Muslim or are you an Australian? That was their favourite question. It was as if they were mutually exclusive. They thought it was a fair question. You were one or the other. They made us choose to swear our allegiance, to prove our loyalty to the geographic landmass we happened to be standing on. Some very bad guys who we never met did some very bad things on the other side of the planet, but we all had to pay. We were all suspects for the rest. This next work is a self-portrait called You See Monsters. It addresses the perception of Muslims in the popular imagination. It became more and more obvious that we weren't part of the mainstream. The idea of the nation didn't include us. One nation under one flag. One nation, lest we forget. When you heard them say, we are under attack, we are under threat, we didn't include people like me. And with a nation under attack, it needed defenders to rise up from amongst its ranks. Some true heroes to fight for what they believed in. Lucky for us, they rose to the challenge like sires of yore to defend our native strand, to defend the common man, the man on the street. These proud nationalists defending our most common denominator. These proud Aussies would fight and die for our flag, which is essentially a picture of someone else's flag and some stars. This work from a couple of years ago is called Self-Portrait as an Ultranationalist. Here, I held a mirror up to the home front and I embodied their fervour. What I found so haunting was how closely it preempted the images and characters to come out of the 2015 Reclaim Australia rallies, where skinheads and patriots got together across the country in every state capital to protest people like me and my family. The image on the singlet is a bumper sticker commonly seen in the city I grew up in and across the country. I remember in the months following 9/11, my mother was chased into a store in Perth, had her scarf torn off, and was assaulted by a group of young patriots. Some true Aussies fighting for freedom. On other occasions, she's been spat on, abused, and had things thrown at her. Isolated incidents, I'm sure, completely coincidental. She doesn't wear a scarf so much these days, and she told me it's the little things she notices. People are nice to her. They make eye contact. The people at the checkout smile back at her. She feels safer. What a lucky country. You see, in a way, we've done this nation a great service. Because as we've been marginalised, vilified, scapegoated and pushed to the fringes, as we threw our children overboard, we unified the nation. We brought together the patriots, the battlers, those true blue Aussie heroes, those Ned Kelly died for our sins, on your mate, we grew here, you flew here, talk back legends. We re-sparked their pride. They marched down the beaches of Cronulla and made their feelings clear. They reclaimed Australia. The irony of white people reclaiming Australia, rushing straight over their heads. Again, I address these issues in this work called The Reintroduction of Australian Knighthood, an official sanctioning of Australian national nobility given to an English royal. I find it interesting that while we're giving fancy pins and titles to an elderly gentleman on a planet far, far away, here in this country, our own homegrown gallant defenders of medieval chivalry are fighting off imaginary dragons of Sharia law, the contamination of the white race, and the compromising of true Australian values. Meat pies will never be the same. How far removed are we from the conversation? Well, national broadcasters are referring to people like me as vermin and as being part of a national security crisis. Where are we to turn? I hope with all my heart that it's not in circles. But I look to the future with optimism because, in a funny way, a strange thing is this feels like it's just part of the grand post-colonial Australian tradition. It's resisting the powers that be. It's waltzing Matilda. And who am I but the swagman being harassed by the squatters and the cops? Now, as a relatively young person, speaking to young people here today who care for, are engaged with the world we inhabit and its future, I'm sure we can all relate to the frustrations of being labelled the apathetic generation. I would implore you to prove them wrong, but in my experience, I find it best to forge your own path regardless of the approval of those who came before you. Now there's an idea worth spreading. Now I'll leave you today with a final image called "It Doesn't Matter How I Feel." It may not feel like we have a say, but every gesture counts, so do it anyway. Thank you very much.
Abdul Abdullah, everybody.